to shine brighter when you walk by, as if it knows that you caught my eye. It's jealous that you light up my life, and when the rain pours in full force, it tries to ruin all of our plans. Oh, but it can't. There's not much the world can do to keep me away from you. I am committed to make sure these dreams we have come true. And gravity tries to push me down. There's no chance when you're around, honey, we'll make it.
Hi everybody, welcome to the day one of SIC's social entrepreneurship webinar. We'll be starting shortly, but just some administrative things. If you have any questions later on, feel free to just put it on the chat, because at the end of the session, we will also have a Q&A as well. And hopefully we can cover as many questions from your side. Yeah, if not, just give us one more minute or two just for the rest of the participants streaming in. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all here on a Monday night. Welcome to CatalySE, SMU Social Impact Catalyst's first ever webinar series about social entrepreneurship here in Asia and the region. So I'm Isabel, SMU SIC's Business Development Director, and here's Spandana, my co-business development director. Today we'll be facilitating the conversation. But first, a brief introduction to SMU SIC will be given by our VP, Ding Anjua.
Thanks, Isabel. The slide. Yeah. So thank you everyone for coming down tonight. So just a brief introduction. So basically, Social Impact Catalyst is actually of SMU, is also part of the mother organization for Social Impact Catalyst of Singapore as well. It was just founded last year and is currently Singapore's largest youth-centric organization that focuses on social entrepreneurship and innovation. So in SIC, we provide students with opportunities to create meaningful social impact by forming teams and on campuses to reach out to develop outreach projects that create change for good. So I think amongst the participants today, there's also social SIC members from other campuses such as NTU, NUS as well. And our main goals as all of our clubs really strives to achieve a social impact through initiating, catalyzing, and building social enterprises or even ground-up initiatives. So it's really just a quick introduction of ourselves, and moving forward, so we'll have, for SMU's side, we have LCSI that has been always advising us and directing our club towards creating better impact. So with that said, I'll invite Christy, Executive Director of LCSI, to talk more about themselves. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, everyone out there. I wish I could say it's so nice to see all of your faces, but I'm imagining a sea of faces out there. So welcome to this I'm just so excited about this webinar. So yeah, I'm the executive director of the Leon Center for Social Innovation. So we are hosted by SMU, and our mission, our aim is to be a transformational force to facilitate and empower social change in Singapore and beyond. So we are on a mission to drive social consciousness and really do our part to enable partnership-driven innovation that can spark positive impact in the lives of people in our communities and our region. So how do we do this? We're quite unique as a social innovation center in an academic setting. So we conduct applied research. We call it translational research, research that can be translated into action. We put the findings, the evidence-based insights into the hands of practitioners who can go and do something with the evidence. We're a knowledge partner for business, government, and for the social sectors. We facilitate partnerships, especially multi-sector partnerships across the sectors that are anchored in socially innovative learning and practices. And we have a number of different platforms. We have our website and a newsroom. We have the region's only digital magazine, Social Space. If you're not familiar with that, Social Space mag.org, socialspacemag.org is pretty cool. And we have other social media channels. So we use all of those to highlight and amplify the work of change makers and their stories of impact and change lives, which you are going to be hearing more about in just a moment. We do, it's so wonderful to see Rajesh because we partner with Ashoka Malaysia and Singapore, and SMU is also an Ashoka U Changemaker campus. And that is a competitive university designation that recognizes that the university has embedded social innovation as a core value and demonstrates the commitment to social innovation throughout the institution and beyond. So before I turn it over, I actually wanted I was doing a little bit of thinking about the ecosystem in Singapore, the social innovation ecosystem, the social enterprise ecosystem, and why I'm so excited at the work that Social Impact Catalyst, SIC, is doing, in addition to Callista and Rajesh that you're going to hear more from this evening. So when I was thinking about an ecosystem, the function of an ecosystem is related to the current of energy flow. So energy flow, information, and bits of matter that moves around and dances around and through and within the system. So the traditional boundaries, when we think of a system, if we think of it in an ecosystem, those boundaries actually become conduits for shared value interests and opportunities to touch and relate and link up. So boundaries are serving they serve a different purpose than in the traditional system approach. So multi-sector partnerships are a good example of this. Domains which were first really fixed, where government was here, business was here, and the civil society or social sector was down here working kind of in silos. Now, the boundaries across each of those sectors is blurring more and more, and we see overlap of interests and resources and strengths and a lot more collaboration across the sectors, so that by pooling those resources and strengths, we can accomplish more together, especially when we're tackling issues of social challenges. So I'm excited. I've been in Singapore for 13 years. Just in the last decade, I've just seen so much growth, whether it's in the social enterprise space, in the general innovation space, but all targeting improving the lives of people in Singapore and across the region. So there's definitely a buzz, and I think all of you guys are on this call because you're part of that buzz. You're part of this growing, connected network of innovators, but innovating for positive social change. So the last thing I want to leave with you is actually a quote. And some of you may have heard of a gentleman called Peter Ho. So Peter Ho is the former head of the Singapore Civil Service. And he's also been a senior advisor to the Center for Strategic Future. So he is a futurist. He's an amazing gentleman with scenario planning looking at the future, and he wrote, "Boundaries define the world that we live in, but we often fall into the trap of thinking of a boundary as something that separates one thing from another. In reality, a boundary does not just separate, but also connects the system to its environment. It is worth recalling that the Renaissance polymath Leonardo da Vinci once wrote, 'Everything connects to everything else.'" So that is the spirit of this ecosystem that we are participating in, that we're building, that we're nurturing, and that we're seeking to amplify the work that you're all doing. Social enterprises and social entrepreneurs are creating a host of ways to address the myriad of really, really, really hard, wicked problems that we have. So it's exciting. I cannot wait to hear what Calista and Rajesh have to say. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the webinar. So thank you all on behalf of SMU and the Lean Center for Social Innovation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your sharing, Christy. It's great to start our event with your valuable thoughts. SMU-SIC was founded this year with the goal of building a community of young, aspiring social entrepreneurs in Singapore. Through this event and our other upcoming ones that you should definitely watch out for, we hope that students and young professionals can become more involved in creating change in their own communities. We're really excited to have you all here with us tonight, and I'm sure our speakers are equally excited to share more about their journeys as change makers and how they work towards impact in their respective fields. Before we start, we wish to briefly introduce our lovely speakers today. With us tonight, we have Calista Tony and Rajesh Burgess. Calista is a strategy consultant at Eden Strategy Institute, where she leads Eden's Future of Mobility practice and has been involved in industry and skills development projects for the built environment sector. Driving social impact has been at the core of Calista's work both locally and regionally. Before joining Eden, Calista worked with the Urban Rural Systems team at the Future Cities Lab to conduct research on peri-urban settlements in Indonesia. She has also volunteered in multiple projects, working for causes such as vocational training and employment for the youth. Calista holds an honors degree in urban studies and a minor in Chinese studies from the Yale and US College. We're extremely glad to have you with us today, Calista. We also have Rajesh, Country Director of Ashoka, Singapore and Malaysia. He's focused on building the field of social entrepreneurship in ASEAN by identifying Ashoka Fellows and facilitating partnerships for the social innovation ecosystem. Rajesh has contributed to several lectures on social business and system change at SUSS, SMU, and NUS. He has been with Ashoka for 6 years now and has pioneered the Ashoka Changemaker schools in India, supporting children as changemakers. He also launched an accelerator program helping social innovators scale impact with technology and has led relationships with several big foundations. Ashoka was ranked the world's 5th leading NGO by NGO Advisor and has built a network of the world's most impactful social entrepreneurs who are changing systems at national and international levels. We're really excited to have you with us today, Rajesh. Thank you both so much for joining us on a Monday night. We can't wait to hear your interesting thoughts on the social entrepreneurship space in ASEAN. So Isa, shall we start?
Sure. So before we dive right into the talk itself, we thought that we could start tonight off with some quick questions for our speakers, just to get the ice broken. So Calista and Rajesh, we just prepared some quick questions for you just to warm up. So do you think you could tell us what you prefer, milk tea or ice cream?
Ice cream.
Ice cream.
Nice, me too. What was your favorite lockdown hobby, if at all?
Reading.
Running.
Oh, okay. What did you read and where did you run?
Yeah, I can go first. I stay next to Henderson Road. So I used to run up all the way up to the Henderson Waves. So there's a nice road that goes up. So that was what I used to do during the lockdown.
I read some Orwell. I read Ursula K. Le Guin's books. Immersed myself in some sci-fi. Yeah.
Nice. Nice. And finally, if you were a fruit, what would you be and why? This is actually a question that we asked our members during interviews, so we thought it would be fun to bring it back.
Did you say fruit?
Yes, if you were a fruit, what would you be and why?
Okay, I don't know the why to this fruit, but recently I took a liking towards grapefruit and I started reading upon grapefruit, and I realized that grapefruit is somewhere in between a lemon and an orange. It has an identity crisis. It's grown in the Caribbean. So here's a fun fact about grapefruit, right? If you take grapefruit with prescription drugs, you can overdose on your prescription drugs, because what happens is ensures maximum absorption of your drugs into your bloodstream if you take it with grapefruit. But otherwise, it's great for vitamin C.
Wow. I don't have fun facts about my fruit, but I think I'd be a papaya. I think it's an excellent, refreshing tropical fruit with lots of seeds, you know? So yeah, papaya would be it.
Okay, nice. Thank you for sharing that info. It was really great to hear. And good to know that grapefruit. Good to know that fact about grapefruit. I hope if anyone in the audience is taking prescription medications right now, they take note of that. Okay, so just to start it off, I guess our first question for tonight would be, how do people in the region define social entrepreneurship, whether that's in Singapore and Malaysia or in Indonesia and beyond?
I could get started on that. So first of all, thanks so much for the SMU-SIC team for organizing this event, for having Rajesh and I here. I think it's so great to always see young people who are really passionate about social impact or just social entrepreneurship in general. I think just from my experience in the region, I'd say that social entrepreneurship is mainly an entrepreneurship that has a that's strategically designed to achieve a social mission. And so it's a very mission-driven kind of form of entrepreneurship. And I think it's deeper than just like profit with purpose, right? Because really, like even the way that you operate the organization, the resources that you use, whether it's integrating your workforce with like a certain community group, or designing products and having that profit go back to social to a social mission. I feel like it's always very much driven by this kind of purpose and this desire to solve a problem using the entrepreneurship model. So I think that kind of would be my one-liner of what social entrepreneurship means. And I think it's really, we're in such a great space and region where so many initiatives are thriving and the community is really growing. And there's like, you know, stakeholders such as yourselves, but also a lot of new kinds of incubators and like, you know, platforms that are seeking to connect all the social enterprises in Indonesia, for example. So yeah, I think that's a good place to start. Rajesh, gonna add to that?
Yeah, sure. Happy to add. Yeah, firstly, thank you, the SIC team, for inviting me. A fun fact, I didn't even know the word social entrepreneurship existed till I was 26. So I'm really amazed that all of you are here for such a conversation very early on in your life. But that's another question, so I'll talk more about it. You know, establishing an agreed definition for social entrepreneurship has not proved to be an easy task. And it's a conversation that runs into a series of debates in Singapore and Malaysia. So I'll just tell you how different organizations define it. So if you go to Magic's website, which is synonymous to raise in Malaysia, they say a social entrepreneurship or a social enterprise is a business entity that is written under any written law in Malaysia that proactively creates positive social or environmental impact in a way that is financially sustainable. Now, if you go to DBS Foundation, they write champion social entrepreneurship, and they talk about social enterprises are the future of business, where business pursue both a profit and impact bottom line, right? And I was just, as I was researching this, I don't know how many of you have come across this article, but there was an article in CNA in 2018 which talks about social enterprise run hawker centers. There was a whole conversation around hawker centers being a social enterprise if they meet this criteria, right? So in Singapore, I've come across these different definitions, but if you actually ask me, then if you look at the space, you have the Good Samaritans, the do-gooders, the social advocates, the social service providers. So where do they all fit in, right? If you have to put a nice definition to it. But some of my best definitions for the space are actually by Oxford and by Skoll, actually. And if you have to look at how Ashoka defines it, Ashoka says social entrepreneurs are individuals with innovative solutions to society's most pressing social, cultural, and environmental challenges. So that's how we define social entrepreneurship.
Thanks, Rajesh and Kalista. That's very interesting. Do you have a favorite definition for yourself, Rajesh, among all the ones you just mentioned?
So I think it's more to do with the journey I've been on. So there was this Ashoka fellow that I was interviewing 3 years back. He's a Singaporean. His name is Beyond Low. He is an urban farmer. And while doing his interview, we spent a lot of time on their childhood and growing up years. Um, and it's very beautiful when you trace the life story of social entrepreneurs. There are two things that's most likely to happen. The first thing is they all have an aha moment. An aha moment when a certain problem impacts them and they think of a solution, right? Or they are molded in the idea. They're molded in that problem and they really are obsessed with it. So for me, social entrepreneurs have been people who are obsessed with solving a problem. And it's more to do with and my definition of social entrepreneur, what I look for a social entrepreneur is obsession. Is this person really obsessed with this problem? The problem is what I normally tend to define the field of social entrepreneurship around. Is, does this person have an entrepreneurial attitude towards solving a pressing problem in society, and how innovative is the solution? So you bring those three things together is how I define social entrepreneurs.
That's interesting. So what is social entrepreneurship to you personally? Is it more of an attitude, a business, a skill set, or something else? Maybe Calista, you can go first on this one.
Yeah, just before I go into that, I just want to throw it back to the audience about like what the importance of having such a clear definition of a social enterprise is. I mean, I won't answer that, but I think there are some implications, right? Whether it's a legal status kind of thing, whether it's some kind of qualifying criteria for access to grants. But I would just like kind of let that question sit there, because I think it's the debate, like as Rajesh mentioned, just happens all the time, and I just wonder like what the purpose of it is. And I think that would help us like find a landing point to agree on. But back to your question, Spadana, it was what is the personal definition that I have of it? I see it as a kind of solution. It's a toolkit, right? It's a means to just change the way that business is done, and it's a way of solving a problem in a smarter way. Because oftentimes, like you'll see the work that nonprofits do, and this is kind of my own experience of how I even got exposed to the social entrepreneurship space. You see the work that nonprofits do, and they're just tirelessly out there raising grant money, looking for donations. Like just relying a lot on different external like funders, for example, and that can often hamper the kind of impact that they're trying to create, whether it's like an education program, for example, and if they're relying on constant donations to fund like some schooling materials or anything like that, if that funding stops, then their work and impact stops. So social entrepreneurship for me is this other way of doing things where from day one, you're thinking about how sustainable you can be as an organization, because you having a solid and recurring and sustainable model of getting some revenue to create an impact and to fund all of your programs, it allows you to do your work better. It allows you to sustain the work such that whatever community is benefiting from it doesn't experience these like cutoffs, right, when you stop being able to have the money to do your programs. So it's really a solution for me, and it's really a long-term kind of intervention. And I hope, I know that a lot of people share this, but I have a desire to see it being mainstream and being adopted by more players, right? Because every organization should have this social mission. I think we can't think about companies as not having that extent of responsibility anymore for what they're doing in their work, whether it's an environmental impact from the waste that they're generating, or a factory creating some sort of pollution or anything. Like I think that kind of social entrepreneurship is a really helpful framing of like what the model or the kind of operating mission of like an enterprise should be, where it just directly benefits the people that its chosen beneficiaries or addresses the problem. So yeah, it's a solution. That's more than anything. Yeah.
What about you, Rajesh? What's it to you?
I like that thought around it being an attitude. The reason why I say attitude matters so much is because one of my favorite social entrepreneurs and the first Ashoka Fellow was a school teacher in Mumbai. And this was way back in 1982. She was the first elected as an Ashoka Fellow because she was the first one to question the status quo around rote learning. So I don't think some of us were born at that time, but in schools in 1982, and in some schools even now around the world, rote learning was the way of teaching kids. And she said, why can't my kids go out, and why can't I get them to ask me questions about the environment? Why is the grass green? Why is the sky blue? So it was that fundamental thought process and an obsession to question the status quo that got her to think of an innovative solution to solve the problem for good. So that's where I tend to rest or look for people with that attitude. And something that our founder always says, he says social entrepreneurs are the essential corrective force. They are system-changing entrepreneurs, and from deep within, their work is committed for the good of all. So that's how I would put my words around and put it together.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. If anyone in the audience has anything else they'd want to share about the topic, feel free to do so in the comments. Or if you have any questions later on for our speakers as they're talking, similarly, feel free to drop us a comment. Okay,
Can I ask a quick
so
question to the audience?
sure.
Since we're still talking about definitions, so you can use the chat box. Can you tell me who are your favorite entrepreneurs? If I had to ask you favorite entrepreneurs, who would it be? And then after that, tell me who's your favorite social entrepreneur.
Okay, I think some of our audience members are thinking, so I think we can give them 1 or 2 minutes to think about it.
Yeah, no answers yet. Maybe the easy question: who's your favorite entrepreneur or an entrepreneur you kind of like to role model? No answers.
How about
Okay.
the new team? Like, what about y'all, all of you?
Yeah, the common answers are coming up. Elon Musk is here.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Gates, yes, he had to be here. Who else? Jack Ma, of course. Jeff Bezos, no, Steve Jobs. Okay. Oh, we have a social entrepreneur name that's come up, Mohammed Yunus. Any other social entrepreneurs?
Creative. Who's this thing on?
Li Ka-shing, I've never heard of that name. The reason I asked that question is when we talk about entrepreneurship, it's always the top 4 names that come up. Nobody talks about the social entrepreneurs. That's why, to Kalista's point, it's so important to recognize them, to see what their work is and talk about them. Sorry, Isabel, I cut into your question. Please go ahead.
Okay, sure. No problem. I was just going to ask, how did you get involved with this space and how does it come into the picture with what you do? And in your career, I'd say, how do you connect social impact in business?
Right, Josh, you can go ahead.
Okay, all right. It's a lot of deep questions. So I'm actually a computer engineer by degree. I worked in IBM for a couple of years. And at some point I wanted to do an MBA, like all engineers, we love to get our MBA in place. So I wanted to go to the US. This is even before like to the tuition fee. So I thought, okay, I should volunteer somewhere, get that experience, put that on my resume. So most likely I can get into a good B school. That was the thought. So there was one day I met a bunch of people who were volunteers, called themselves volunteers, and they were part of this organization called Make a Difference. So they shortened it and they called themselves Mad Volunteers. So they said that they're recruiting volunteers for the organization they're part of, and this was in India, and they said I should come. So I said great. So I set an alarm for the next day, and I woke up when the alarm hit, but I switched off my alarm and went back to sleep. And when I did that, I told myself my chance to save the world is gone. But I went back to sleep. I don't know why I didn't get up from the bed. Then they called me up at 11. I was still sleeping, and they said, hey, we are waiting for you. Do you still want to do this? And I said, okay, this time I'm not going to miss my bus. So I got up from there, went for this volunteer recruitment, became a Make a Difference volunteer. And I used to go to a shelter home in Bangalore and teach every weekend. I used to teach English. Then the subsequent year, I went on to lead the city chapter, and then eventually became an employee with them, trying to fundraise for them. So that was how I completely transitioned from being in corporate to being someone in the social space, trying to really understand what the issues were. And the subsequent journey from there led me to Ashoka. Ashoka introduced me to the world of social entrepreneurship. That's why I said I learned about social entrepreneurship very late in my life. And that's how I got started. But I've been in Singapore for the last 4 years. In the last 4 years, I've spent a lot of time I've been interviewing a lot of social entrepreneurs from Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, tracing their journeys. And in that process, have built a good understanding of the field of social entrepreneurship. So that's how my understanding and my exposure to the space has been. Maybe I'll pause there. And Kalista, do you want to share your thoughts?
Sure. Thanks, Rajesh. So unlike Rajesh, I had quite maybe an earlier exposure to the field of social entrepreneurship. For me, it started really early. Not so much social entrepreneurship, but even having like that lens of seeing the world, or just being having your eyes open to the social problems around you. And for me, that started with a really beloved 6th grade teacher of mine who gave us an assignment called the Social Journal. I don't think she called it that, but I mean, that's how I remember it. And essentially what she told us to do is every week to do field work, to, look around, see what you're observing around you. And there was this one day where I was observing this group of kids, because I grew up in Indonesia in Jakarta, and when it rains, there's a group of kids who will stand outside different buildings with umbrellas. And they will stand there and wait for you, and then they will escort you to your car where you've parked it in a parking lot, and then you'll pay them a small fee for that kind of service, right? And so that's something that I put inside my journal. And she's like, oh, what do you think about it? Like, what is it like to you? And I was like, oh, it's so interesting that these kids like found a way to like make money, but it must, they should be in school. Like, so I think very early on I had that kind of like exposure or just a way of seeing like kids and just kind of the inequality because of the school that I was going to and so on. So that was really one of my first kind of memories of like just being attracted to this idea of solving problems and solving social problems and the importance of education. So I think over the years, I kind of try to expose myself and involve myself in organizations that did activities related to education and schooling, volunteer teaching, and so on. And I think one of those organizations is YCAP, Yayasan Cinta Anak Bangsa, which is like one of the biggest NGOs or now social enterprises in Indonesia. And I had a friend who is very closely affiliated with them. And through that, I learned about just the challenge of running an NGO. And like I mentioned earlier, right, like that kind of constant struggle of trying to find funding, trying to find grants and trying to find donors, or just having very limited room to move around because you're restricted by, for example, your funders' kind of demands or your funders' kind of reporting metrics and so on. So I think that because of these conversations with this person from YCAB, I was exposed to another model where she was at that time thinking about, is there another way that we can run this organization that allows me to overcome all these different challenges and barriers to running that NGOs tend to face. And so, yeah, and from there, I met people, amazing individuals. I was exposed to Ashoka's work very early on. I wanted to be a Ashoka changemaker. I started like a small organization in high school, and then tried to just involve myself in some of these competitions. So one of them took place here in Singapore with the Asia Center for Social Entrepreneurship and Philanthropy. And we essentially worked with, I think, about 10 to 12 social enterprises in the region. And just found one of the main challenges that they were facing is the pioneer gap, right? Where you maybe are too big for like very seed, initial starting money, but you're also too small for these other pools of money that can help you scale your impact. And I learned so much from that experience of interacting with these entrepreneurs very closely and recruiting them to join the challenge. And I think now it's transitioned very nicely into my own work. I think one day I do have some sort of aspiration to be a social entrepreneur myself, and I think that can be said for a lot of young people nowadays. I think they inherently see business as having some sort of social mission. At least that's what I've been exposed to in my own circles, and that's something that's very encouraging for me. But yeah, that transitions nicely into Eden, where I now work. Eden has played a big part, I think, in Singapore's social entrepreneurship landscape. I think we did the advising for, so that eventually led to the setting up of RAISE, which is the Center for Social Entrepreneurship that we all know now today. And I think at Eden, it's not at crossroads at all with what I hope to do, right? Because I think that kind of position that Eden plays as a consulting firm, overseeing and engaging with all of these different like stakeholders from different sectors, actually allows us to better understand like what models, observe what models there are in social entrepreneurship, or what ways that we can be measuring the impact of these social enterprises, or what funder needs might look like. I think we have that kind of knowledge and we're happy to share it. We actually have, I think, a piece published online about funder needs, which social enterprises is a great resource for them because they can understand, right, like for every single type of funder, what are the kind of needs that that they might be looking for from your enterprise. So I think that kind of journey has been really nice for me. It's quite a nice story arc from being very young and just having this awareness of the issues around you, and then getting older and trying to find ways that you can be part of the solution. So yeah, that's my kind of journey and exposure to social entrepreneurship.
That's great. It's really nice to know that there's no age for developing an interest in something like social entrepreneurship. I think we have a few questions in the chat. On the topic of entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs, which position would Blake Mycoskie be considered? He's the founder of Tom's Shoes, considering its scale today. I think Rajesh, you could take this.
Yeah, I think everybody is. I think there are a lot of people who admire the founder of Tom's Shoes and the way he actually built a responsible business, and he was able to drive the profits of his business into the story he was telling around his shoes. I wouldn't call him a social entrepreneur. I would still call him a business entrepreneur, but I would say he's somebody who was quickly able to align his business goals to the social impact his business could create. That's where I see his value. So I think he had the principles of social entrepreneurship, and he was quite aligned there. Now this goes to something Calista was also sharing, and I don't know how many of you heard of Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman, right? Have you heard of Milton Friedman? Milton Friedman is famous for one very powerful uh, philosophy that he drove in the late 1970s. He said, the purpose of a business or the main responsibility of a business is only to its shareholders. And that's how profit became such a dominant element of running any business. Now, what we're seeing right now is, and this is where social entrepreneurship has played such an important role at the intersection of social impact and business. It said that the role of a business is not just to create profits, but it has to create value for people, create value for the planet, and it must have a purpose. So that's how from 1P it has gone down to 3Ps, and that's where Tom's Shoes plays such an important role in that definition.
Calista, do you have anything to say?
I think I would classify like Tom's Shoes. I mean, there are a couple of models, right, of social entrepreneurship, and I think his was a bit more aligned with like cause marketing. Like, he really advocated for this like issue of children not having access to good footwear, and therefore that hampered like their ability to do their daily activities, like in school and whatever. So I think that was a big kind of like model of his work, and I think he did raise awareness in that sense. But I think personally, from what I've read about his own work, I'm not clear as to how all of those proceeds eventually go back to the community besides the provision of those shoes. And I think in terms of ways to scale impact or make it more sustainable to empower communities, I wonder if that is the best way of doing that. So I think I would just offer those thoughts, not to say like to disqualify his work or in any way, but to just be cautious of different models in which entrepreneurs choose to deliver their work. And to think of how we can deepen it, right? To deepen engagement beyond just providing and giving shoes for every pair that you buy. So that would be my one thought.
Okay, thank you. I think another question, love all the personal stories about your early beginnings. How would you encourage those who want to take the SE path but are unsure of how they can do so? I think either one of you can start.
I think Rajesh gave a great example actually, because yeah, you want to go first? I can just add on.
So how many of you want to get into business school? Just joking. Don't ever do that for your resume. It's not worth it. No, there are various options. I think it's a great story about how you started young with finding a problem and thinking about a solution. I think the basic place where you can all start is there a problem? Instead of saying what is that you want to be, maybe you should ask yourself, what problems can I solve? So if there are problems that are around you that you can do something about, ask yourself, why does this problem exist and what can I do about it? That's like the first step of going down the path of social entrepreneurship. But there are other ways to be engaged. One is you could go work for a social impact organization, right? You could work with a social entrepreneur. If you want, you can work with a charity. You can go work with consulting firms. That exposes you to the space and helps you how you can come in from different ways. Being part of SIC is one step in being part of the journey, because you are much more aware than a regular young person. And another option is this is a little bit more risky, but the world of social entrepreneurship is bigger and different outside Singapore. And a lot of people get into it because they sign up as teachers. Like say, for example, there's this whole movement around Teach for Malaysia, Teach for Indonesia, Teach for India. A lot of people go in and become a teacher in a primary school for 2 years, and then they really understand that space. So if that's something that you are interested in, there are these fellowships available for young people globally. If you can take a gap year from school, or if you want to spend some time in that, seek out some fellowships, learn about the social issues out there. That will help you build understanding, and then you'll be able to know about how you want to contribute.
Maybe just to add to that, I would say there's a bit of inner and external work that you can do, right? And I think the inner work is more important. Like Rajesh said, like having some sort of obsession with the problem that you're trying to solve. I think that's critical. And understanding what your motivations are for social entrepreneurship. Like that's something that I had to ask myself very early on. So speaking directly from personal experience here, where I was like, what is it that's so, because it is a very attractive and sexy kind of job, right? You're making some money, you're doing good for the world, but I think it's more this obsession with solving that problem that matters more, and kind of just questioning your motivations there. And that's the kind of inner work that you have to do. So like Rajesh, it's not like, oh, let me be like your volunteer to get into business school, but it's going to be a really painful and journey that requires a lot of persistence and endurance. So that's something that I've learned from speaking with different social entrepreneurs who are doing their businesses now, because it's not like just a shareholder, it's not just a company you can close, because people's livelihoods are on the line, right? Especially if you're employing them to create your products or something like that. So I think that kind of responsibility requires a lot of readiness to commit to that. But at the same time, that shouldn't scare you. It should just be a kind of a sense check, right? Like, this is something that I really want to do. And that comes to then comes the external piece, which is just exposing yourself, understanding what kind of models there are. Because I think the more that you see different kinds of models or types of social enterprises, because it's not just a product kind of thing, right? Where it's a commercial model where maybe a group of women weavers are creating a nice product and that you're helping market it, and then the profit goes back to them. Or maybe it's a work integration model where you employ persons with disabilities into your enterprise, and then you provide them training and so on. So I think just learning about all these different models can be a good source of inspiration to just understand what's out there, what it could look like, what your business could look like, which area you might want to run your business in. And I think the third one is joining these. There's so many competitions nowadays, or just these kind of like challenges, innovation challenges, hackathons. And I think I would join those just for two kind of reasons. The first is to meet people like yourself. I think community is really important in like starting this journey, because you have people who are equally invested and enthusiastic about this issue, the way that all of you have joined SIC here. And I think it also just gives you exposure, right, to like learn, like to be given some sort of problem statement and to practice developing some sort of solution for that. I think that's really key. And yeah, the third external piece, going back to the obsession with the problem topic, is just really having a real clear understanding of what that problem is. Because that's, I think, what at the heart of what all these teaching fellowships help do, right? For someone who's interested in education, that's something that I completely invest my time in, because it gives me an understanding of, on the ground, what are the real needs that I could then help to create a solution for. And at the end of the day, like having that really deep understanding of the problem, I might not actually land on a social entrepreneurship type of intervention, because I don't think every problem can be solved in that way. I might end up on something else. So I think it's the obsession with the problem, and social enterprise is just like one of those methods to addressing that. But there's so many. There could be a policy intervention, there could be a consulting type work that you can do. So yeah, exposure, inner work, and that obsession with the problem.
Thank you, Calista and Rajesh. But how aware are people right now about social entrepreneurship in Singapore, or even ASEAN as a whole? What do the people around you feel about its potential? Calista, you want to take this?
Calista, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for Rajesh, like he lives and breathes this, like everyone around him is aware. For myself, I think I've seen the awareness increase. And, the way that I'm measuring that is like, how much news do I get about it? What kind of initiatives am I seeing in my social media? And I have a lot of friends who happen to be social entrepreneurs too. So that's one way. And I think it's a bit of a biased sample, I think, for myself, because obviously as someone who's in this space or who's passionate about this space, I surround myself with people who are equally enthusiastic and passionate. So that's kind of one caveat that I would put to my understanding of the awareness. But I think you can tell that there is increasing interest in it, because of the number of events that are held about it, the number of larger corporations and entities that are providing a lot of sponsorship and support for it. In Singapore, I think DBS Foundation is key, right? Like they're one of the big actors in the scene whose mission is to ensure that there's a thriving social entrepreneurship sector and these entrepreneurs have the support that they need. So that's kind of my gauge. And I think in Indonesia in the past few years, I've seen a lot more they formed PLUS, PLUS, which stands for Platform Usaha Sosial. And that is like a platform for social entrepreneurs. So that's something that's new. They're getting more organized. And so that's how I can tell that there's some sort of maturity towards like this landscape. They're building networks, they're offering more programs. So I think the fact that there are these bodies that are more dedicated towards responding to the needs of entrepreneurs, or even just having this SE kind of education is a good sign to me that it's becoming a more mature and like concrete sector. There's other entrepreneurs they can learn from and so on. So that'd be my, I guess, 2 cents of the state of the sector right now. I think there's so much potential even after where we're at, right? Rajesh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think as Calista said, I can be a bit biased because my LinkedIn feed, Facebook feed, everything is filled with social entrepreneurs. So I'm living in this bubble that everybody I know understands the term. I still struggle to explain social entrepreneurship to my parents. They just tell people that I live in Singapore. That's it. They don't even tell what I do. So I don't know how successful I am with that definition. But I would say the awareness is nascent. And the awareness is also largely built on the perspective that organization or the person comes with. I think in Singapore, largely I've seen the awareness around social entrepreneurship driven by business sustainability and creating businesses for social impact. And that's where the conversation has gone. I've seen conversations driven around hawker centers being social enterprises if you hire or keep people who are differently abled. So I'm just a little worried whether the awareness of the field is built around that notion, you know? So especially with young people. As Calista said, there are a lot of players in the space. And as you see, if you look at RAISE, if you look at DBS, if you look at Accept, if you look at Lean Center, they all have a certain narrative that they all talk about. There are interconnections, but there is still a perspective. So it's always how people are exposed to that perspective and then talk through that lens. I don't see the presence of some of the bigger entities other than Ashoka, like Skoll, Schwab, in Singapore to really talk and advocate for it. I do see the absence of fellowships in Singapore that exposes young people to careers and pathways of social impact, which are limited again. So I think those could be potential inhibitors why the awareness is limited. But what's positive is you have companies talking about it, companies wanting to host conversations around it. And I think that's powerful.
Okay, great. That's great to hear. Thank you so much for sharing. So, what could you say are some of the most pressing issues to you right now, whether in Singapore or the region? And maybe, in light of COVID, what would some of the what do you think, what issues do you think have been revealed by the pandemic, maybe? And how do you think social enterprises can play a role in addressing these issues and these gaps?
Okay, I can start this, Calista. I think this is such an interesting conversation around issues. So normally when I look at issues, I tend to look at, because if you look around us, we tend to see problems, right? Either we observe them and then we talk about it. But I tend to look at issues through a systems lens. So I normally encourage people to ask, why does that problem that you've just seen exist? You know, what are the different systems at play for that problem to really surface? So something isn't working. So I tend to analyze problems through a systems lens, right? So in that view, if you do take a look at issues around us, there are so many that come up. But I do see this burgeoning problem around youth mental health and about the stress around young people's mental capability as they tend to survive and thrive in this world that is changing really fast. So how do you solve for that problem? So then again, the question becomes, why does that problem exist? And there are so many things at play here. You can go all the way back to school years. You can look at the education systems, you know. So those things come up. That is one. Second, the question around COVID, and I think the migrant the migrant workers issue came to the fore when COVID happened. It did show that there were a few cracks in the system for the problem to spread at that scale. Food sustainability became another conversation on came to the fore, when COVID happened. So these are some of the problems that I did observe. But I think unlike other countries, the problems are not on your face. Like if you go to Indonesia or India, problems are on your face. You don't have the size of the population to have to see problems at scale. So a lot of people could argue that Singapore doesn't have any problems, which I argue back, saying Singapore has problems. We are not looking at the systemic causes of those problems. And we cannot just wait for someone else to solve the problem for you. You can't expect your parents to solve the problem for success in your life, right? So that's why it's so, in Ashoka, we always say how it's so important to be a change maker, that you really need to look at things around you and see why they exist and try to solve for it. Yeah, so that's just a crux of what I just want to share around that.
Thanks, Rajesh. I think I love the systems perspective. I think it lets you kind of just not only understand like how the problem is interlinked, but also how the solutions could be like interlinked as well, right? And there's different ways to intervene or different moments in that system where you can, tweak a little something and hope for a good outcome. I think in addition to like the issue on migrant labor, which was a really big thing here in Singapore, and I think there's also an increasing like vocal group about that's speaking about climate change and just environmental sustainability overall. I think we're seeing a lot more ground up efforts, for example, to address like the use of plastic or waste and so on. I think that's a more local issue that I've heard about in Singapore specifically, with like climate change rally and so on. So I would just add that to Rajesh's earlier points. I think in the region though, something that has been really, really capturing my attention is the digital divide that's in place and how, specifically in the field of education. I think we're seeing that, with COVID lockdowns, no schools, and we're relying on a lot of digital modes for delivery of education. And I think that's really exposing, especially in a place like Indonesia where you have like 17,000 islands, and you have low income households who are sharing one mobile phone and they have to take turns to take courses online. I think that's just really showing you, right, like the extent of the digital divide. And I've read a couple of pieces that just show like the impact of the years lost from this 1 year of not going to school, and how that's just it's an insane impact. So I think that's something to look out for, and and even that alone, if you think of it from a systems perspective, it's not just about giving every house another mobile phone. It's also about the infrastructure. Is it ready to support their kind of learning? Are the teachers even well equipped to transition into this other mode of teaching? I think we're seeing really creative uses of like WhatsApp, for example, to be a mode of like lesson delivery, to check in on students. So I think you're seeing a lot of these like secondary issues from this digital divide caused by like COVID and the delivery of education. I think that's something to look out for in the years to come. So yeah, I would just add that to the earlier list of issues.
Thank you. According to you, is Singapore as a community doing enough to inspire social entrepreneurs? Especially going back to what you said about all the organizations, DBS, Ashoka, what else can the public and private sector do collectively or individually to make it more conducive for aspiring social entrepreneurs? Sure, Rajesh, go first.
This is a tough question. Because you can have different viewpoints on this. Maybe to answer that question, I could maybe compare with how I saw social entrepreneurship become an attractive career for young people in India. And then I could just compare that with Singapore. See, for the longest time in India, this was early 2000s, if somebody went to work in a non-profit organization, they were frowned upon, right? Because your parents want you to work in big multinational companies and go to business schools, right? Or either you work there or start one, always frowned upon. And then I think what happened is, as a important tipping point, there are some fellowships started emerging, like Teach for India. Some youth-based fellowships started emerging. And as these fellowships started blossoming, there were a lot of them, the alumni of these fellowships, either started organizations or went to organizations and did something about social impact, So all of a sudden it became a fad among young people to either become a Teach for India fellow or a Make a Difference fellow, or all kinds of fellowships started emerging. So all of a sudden it became normal for young people to explore something in the social impact space as part of their journey, you know. So this was somewhere around middle of 2008, and then somewhere around 2015, 16. If somebody told me that, hey, I'm working for an NGO, or I'm doing this here, or you explain to your parents, or you got some recognition, you come in the news and all of that, it became much more common. If I compare that with Singapore, I think where I struggle a bit is the, the environment to facilitate something that can be normal is still missing, right? I know as part of NUS and other universities, there's a chance where you can go and do social impact projects outside Singapore. SIF does something around young social entrepreneurs. Universities does it, but I think. Taking a career path in social impact, is that something your parents would advocate you to do? I'm not sure. Do you have the opportunities to build a career in social impact? Right? I'm not sure. Like, do you want to go work with agencies, or do you want to work with entrepreneurial organizations or consulting firms? So I think that tipping point is still yet to come, is my viewpoint. But I think, as Calista was saying, there are more intermediaries, universities, DBS Foundation talking about it. So I'm optimistic that in the next few years, as SIC grows, there will be more young people knocking on doors or starting ventures, or even going outside Singapore and solving problems in the Philippines or Cambodia. And I think that will change the game.
I think Rajesh's point earlier on, like, the lack of fellowships here in Singapore really resonated with me, because I think those are really important instruments that not buy time, but like they give you the opportunity to experiment, to learn, right, more in more depth about this field in a way where you're not too concerned about, for example, your job, or like other responsibilities you may have. So I think that kind of program is quite absent, and it would be so wonderful to see more of that here in Singapore. So that's one thought I'd have. I think what I'd love, I'm a big education person, so I think the fact that we are seeing these kind of communities on campuses is really great. But my challenge would be to bring it even earlier, to have this kind of social impact education, even be something that you're exposed to in JC, or in polys, or not all polys come after, but I mean, like, or just basically earlier than your university years, right? If there's any opportunity for you to already be working with social enterprises, for social enterprises to open their doors and invite young people to be a part of their family. That's what CatalySE does, for example. They recruit very young facilitators and volunteers, and I had the privilege of doing that. I think that would be a really great way to just increase exposure even earlier, such that it becomes what Rajesh is saying, right? It becomes this desired career path. It becomes a very feasible and real opportunity. I think you need a lot more examples or successes that people hear about. I think that's like something that's quite common in Singapore, from my years of working here at least, that you need some good examples and then you follow them. That's what it takes to be like a cultural norm here. So that's one thought I have about just being like a more desirable career path, and having earlier exposure to that education. Besides that, I think we tend to hear about the same social enterprises quite frequently in Singapore. It's like the same select few. So I think getting exposure to more names, like bringing more people to the fore. I mean, off the top of your head, you always hear of Better Barista, for example. You hear of Dignity Kitchen, or 18 Chefs, and so on. So I think giving more diversity and a greater flavor of these enterprises that are working in different causes might also be quite important. And I think that's just about communication, right, and having access to like what those different names are and what they do. And yeah, I think that's what it'll take to improve from where we're at.
Yeah. I just want to add to Calista's point, because it sparked a few thoughts too. I think Singapore has such a powerful passport. You can always go anywhere you want. So maybe it's about not just thinking about it within Singapore, but also broadening your perspective. Can you step outside Singapore and see if you could maybe intern or work with a social enterprise or an entrepreneurial nonprofit in the region? They would definitely value that the expertise Singaporeans bring. I think it changes the game. It will change your game. It will change your attitude, and you'll be solving a bigger problem that you never solved before. So can you look for opportunities outside Singapore? So I think for Singapore's growth in the space, you have to look outside. You can't keep it within Singapore to really help build a thriving space.
Yeah. One more thing I'd add is like just opportunities for skilled volunteering to support the work of social enterprises in Singapore or even in the region. I think that's something that maybe COVID has created an opportunity for, right? Where we're sitting here in Singapore, but we could be supporting the work of SEs that are understaffed or needing some sort of support in Indonesia and like some of the islands, for example, who are doing like environmental or coastal kind of interventions. I think that's also another possibility of what we can be doing within our space here, and to not think of Singapore as like boundaries, right? But rather like opportunities for connection, I think, as Christy was sharing about earlier.
Yeah, I think it really also comes down to having the platforms that let more people know about all these different social enterprises. So platforms like SIC or a lot of different resources that Singapore offers would be great for getting people involved even at a younger age. So we have another follow-up. This one's for Calista, but Rajesh, feel free to chime in. So building onto the question of having enough, is Singapore doing enough as a community? I think given your urban studies background, Calista, do you think that there are enough physical spaces and things like that that help stimulate this kind of thinking and this kind of social change in the region or even just in Singapore?
I missed that one line where you were, does Singapore have enough? What was it?
Sorry, does Singapore have enough spaces, whether that be physical or however you define it, to facilitate this kind of social innovation?
It's a very interesting question. And I think, yeah, relevant to the urban studies background, I think if you think of space in like the physical sense where you can really, for example, like build something with your hands, a very tactile kind of intervention that really alters maybe like some sort of solution that you install in someone's home, or, you know, I think that in that sense, Singapore is quite limited. Just because of the geographical space, like there's not enough of it. You wouldn't be able to just like decide that you want to do some sort of urban farming kind of intervention. You'd be limited to the rooftop that Singapore has, as opposed to a place like Indonesia where, you know, there's like a big farming community. You can show some sort of intervention and pass on a solution there and trial it. So I think that is a kind of a big space. The lack of space is quite present here in Singapore. And I think, but I think in terms of spaces to have like a dialogue, for example, that kind of space, I think we're seeing more of that. And I think campuses play a very big role of doing so. I don't hear it as like a mainstream topic. There's still like discussions within bounds like this, like a very social entrepreneurship or social impact led kind of organization like SIC. But yeah, like I think there are those kinds of spaces. It would be great to see some like labs or just places where, you know, things like Social Impact Collider, right? Where like, you know, where multiple organizations can be in the same place. You can support each other as social enterprises all working off the same area. I don't see enough of those either. Not saying that there has to be a certain amount, but it would be great if they were, you know, more mainstream and these social enterprises could actually pull resources together and work together from a certain space. So yeah, those are some angles that I would use to think about that question. It's an interesting one. Rajesh, I don't know if you have anything to add for that.
Yeah, I've actually forgotten about the concept of physical spaces in the last 8 months. I don't know if it's truly valid anymore. But yeah, before COVID happened, everything was in a conference format or a round table in person. Everything was in person, right? So I think Enabling Village was created with that idea around differently abled people. You know, that's a space to explore. There's an Ashoka fellow who runs a farm in Banjara, Edible Garden City. So he actually has a farm. He grows these vegetables. So it's not a space for social. It's not like social entrepreneurship space, but he's a social entrepreneur trying to create social impact. Then SIF brings together YSEs, young social entrepreneurs together before. So that was a great space. But I think we should now talk about what are the virtual spaces for these conversations. And from Ashoka's side, what I can offer is we run a virtual community event every month called Coffee for Change. And the whole soul of Coffee for Change is, okay, let's find one issue and let's bring people around that issue to talk about it. Like how well do you understand the problem and what are the solutions to solve that problem? So it happens on a monthly basis. If you are interested to join that community, I can just drop you an email, just send us a note. Happy to include you in that community.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. Those are some really interesting insights. So moving on to our next question, how do you feel that the SE landscape is changing, especially with an influx of venture capital, and has the recent focus on social impact investing affected the landscape in any way? Either one, if you could start.
I can start with an example, and this example is Gojek. So what's funny is one core reason why Ashoka exists is to identify and recognize social entrepreneurs. We were a bit inactive in Indonesia for 3-4 years or even 5 years. That's when Gojek really took off. This was, I think Gojek started in 2012. So we were having an internal conversation saying that if we had found Gojek in 2012 with the idea they had, which was to build livelihoods for people who are not in the regular work stream, then most likely we would have championed them to become a social entrepreneur. But if we were to take Gojek now through the process, the idea is still the same. They build livelihood models, but would we still take down that process? So the breaking point of the conversation was the access to capital. And I think what is one place where we feel a bit strained right now is, and this has been a growing internal debate within Ashoka and even split the way we think about social entrepreneurs internally, because we feel social entrepreneurs create solutions for the good of all. They should not create value just for shareholders. It's about the community too. And then there is this growing stream of VC money that's coming into ideas that are creating solutions for people who would fall under the social entrepreneur window. So then we were torn apart saying, okay, is that the route for social entrepreneurship? Should social entrepreneurship draw upon capital, and what kind of capital? But I think the growing understanding is, see, that kind of money will have to meet a certain kind of outcomes from the entrepreneur, which is to maximize profit, right? I think Gojek, Grab, even though they say they're creating value in the community, their goal, the shareholders will not leave them, right? So then, so we said, as a social entrepreneur, you should be mindful of what capital you want to raise and how do you still protect your mission, right? So protecting mission became a bigger conversation than saying, okay, let's bring in VC money. So I know a lot of people put posts out there saying, hey, raise my Series A funding, raise Series B, Series C, Series D. I say that's all great, but have you protected your mission to raise that money? If you haven't, then I think you should really look at your terms and agreements.
That's such an amazing answer. Totally agree with that, Rajesh. And I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier, right? About like what the social entrepreneur's responsibility is, and how, when you start a social enterprise, you're accountable. I think your capital sources can increase the number of people you're accountable to. And is that something that you can manage while delivering on this kind of social impact that you'd like to see in your community? I don't know how easy of a balance that is. But I will say that I think impact investing has created this more tangible thing for the non-social enterprise world to engage with. And I think that's been a promising kind of development, because I think actually impact investing is quite central, right, to the mission of social entrepreneurship, and saying that when you do good business, like, that is still impactful, it still generates returns, like it is still a fundamentally solid enterprise that can do good instead of just being very shareholder driven. So I think impact investing is actually part of the business case of social enterprises. And I think another layer of that I would just bring to this topic is the question of scale, right? Because I think that's what sometimes your capital allows you to do. But are you ready to commit to that because of the terms and conditions that Rajesh mentioned? Is that something that would actually benefit your enterprise to scale in that way? I don't think everything is necessarily meant for scaling at a certain speed. And I think there's just, in this way, the social entrepreneurship landscape operates a bit like the startup landscape, right? Where like people are looking left and right, what are the achievements that this guy has achieved, and what am I running after that? I think that's just another caution that I would add, right? Like, is scale actually really important for you right now? And what does that capital help you to do? Does it help you to deepen your impact? Does it help you to reach out to more people? Is it something that your organization can take on right now? I think those are just all the questions that come along with that additional source of money. And sometimes people just take it too quickly before having like nailed down something that's very solid. Yeah, I think those are my additional comments about that.
Thanks for that.
There's this term that a lot of social entrepreneurs use called mission investors. That means the people who put money into your organization, at least they're aligned to the mission. I think attracting that kind of investors is more important than attracting a VC. If you as a social entrepreneur, you are focused on that goal, right? But if the pathway you're choosing is different, then it can be. See, the thing is, the interesting part here is you can split your organizations. You can do a non-profit, you can do a for-profit, you can do a co-op. So I think you shouldn't be stuck with just one organization. You can create different organizations, and you can choose what kind of capital do you want to attract for different organizations. So that's the trick. But the fine balance is protecting your mission and what you stand for, rather than what the VC wants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm reminded of like the earlier what I was sharing about the different funder archetypes there are, right? I think instead of feeling like, okay, this impact investor is like the one source of funding that I can get as a social entrepreneur, there's so many other types out there. And I think just being aware of what those other types are and what they kind of demand or what their motivations are when they invest is quite important. Like you can still have your foundations, you can still have your niche foundations, you can have your angel investors, your strategic CSR guys, like your corporate innovation accelerators. Like these are all different other people who are there to support, financially support the work that you do, and just being open to those other models aside from just relying on impact investing, which has done a great job about mainstreaming all of this. It's just having that knowledge and awareness of the range of options that you have. It's quite important.
I'm sure you all agree that there's definitely improvement in the support that we're getting for social entrepreneurship. So would you think that social enterprises will ever outdo or replace some normal businesses? I think it's kind of like the would machines replace humans kind of question.
So I'm of the view, along with another board member we have, that all businesses should become social enterprises or should adopt the principles of social enterprises. But the counter view is every time there is somebody who is trying to do something good for the planet, there's always that counter idea where you can do the same idea but create enough harm to the planet. So you can never predict where they're going to come from, right? But I think at the core of it, if your business today, as much as it wants to create profit, also can protect people, can protect the planet, and has a strong social purpose, then I think you're taking one step towards it, towards creating a good for all society, rather than just creating a vicious cycle of exploitation. So I think that's the fine line. Yeah.
That's interesting, Rajesh. I think that's what I started earlier off with, right? Like that it's an aspirational kind of statement to see that all businesses are socially driven, are socially motivated businesses. And I think I was very encouraged, for example, a few days ago when we had another panel with a speaker from Kimberly-Clark who leads their strategy and like global strategy. And he was sharing like even Kimberly-Clark, we inherently have a social mission. Like we can't even ask that question anymore. It's an irrelevant question to say whether or not a business is socially minded or there's a social purpose for it, because there absolutely is. And I think he was sharing about some sustainability outcomes that the company was tracking, and how actually when you operate in that way, it's actually better for the business. So it's not even asking like, can we make a case for social impact? It's actually that it made a case for itself, because it's contributed well to their bottom line and so on. So I think it's encouraging to see that even larger players like that are trying to think of their businesses in that way as well. And so I think we can be optimistic about it. And I think it's up to, there's of course what Rajesh cautioned about, but it's up to this kind of, it's about mainstreaming this education and this language, and also just as consumers, demanding that of businesses, and as young potential entrepreneurs sitting here today, like it's in your hands, right, to design this kind of business as well. So I would say I am hopeful. I like the question that you asked, and I know there's a time element to it, like when we'll reach that tipping point where like all enterprises, I don't know that when, but it's a far away aspiration, I think, that we can hold on to. And it should, like, if we think about what that kind of statement is supposed to do, it can either be like, okay, this is a reality check of where we're at now, or it can be a goal, right? We're saying that because that's what we would like to see. And I think that's something that we can work towards. So yeah, that's how I would think about whether or not we can replace or mainstream the social enterprise business model.
Actually, just to add, there's actually a spectrum. I think, Calista, you would have come across the spectrum. The spectrum runs from non-profit to traditional for-profit. So on the extreme light, you have your non-profit. Then you have a non-profit that generates some revenue, right? Then you have a social enterprise. That means you have a business model to generate the revenue, but you are not a nonprofit. Then you have a socially responsible business, right? That means it's all about the business, but you are socially responsible. Then you have businesses that practice corporate social responsibility, right? They run core businesses. And then you have your traditional for-profit, proper businesses. So that's a spectrum. So when you look at that entire spectrum, the question should be more about where you're playing and what you want to be, you know?
All right. Before we move on to the Q&A segment, maybe just one last question from us. If you could choose one pressing issue that you'd want to solve, which one would it be and why? I see Rajesh is thinking. CatalySE, you can go.
I think he's thinking, but mine is deep and embedded in my heart. I think it's something that I think about every day, and that is what I was mentioning earlier about education, and just the access to quality education is something that I don't know if you want to call it like a life mission, but that is the one issue for me, because I think it's at the foundation, right, of everything else that you do. What, like, I can think of the impact that a good teacher has had on me. I had an excellent geography teacher who forever changed the way that I see the world and the way that I see schooling. And I would like that opportunity to be given to more students. And I think I think hard about the ways in which we can do that. Whether it's through, how do we work together with the industry to understand how the curriculum needs to change to ensure that there's employment, for example, or how do we ensure that the education systems that we have teach people to be socially aware and socially conscious about the issues around us. How do we create leaders that care for their community? How do we create active citizens? I feel like all of those stem from the attitudes, from the exposure, from the way that you learn how to collaborate, all inside the classroom. And it's something that starts very early on. And I think education for me is the root cause, or the root kind of the first step, right, to everything else that you think about, because the way that education like your schooling years teach you how to see the world, and that way of seeing the world affects the pathway of like the career pathway that you choose to take, how you treat others, whether or not you participate in politics, like all of these come from that. So I think for me, it's a way of going to the root, and of seeing like the biggest return on whatever I do. And I think it starts with all of us as individuals, right? That's the beauty of education, that everyone learns individually. And I think, our society, our movements are all comprised of these individual minds. So that's kind of that's the way that I see this field and this issue that I would like to address.
Yeah, I think this overlaps with you, CatalySE. The problem that I'm obsessed with right now, and it's got an Ashoka influence. More than defining the problem, it's a lot to do with some, framing questions. So one is, how do we get more young Singaporeans to self-identify as change makers? So that's the framing question. And sub-questions under that is, how do we shift the conversation from asking young people, what do you want to become, to what problems are you solving? And how do you shift the conversations from designing an education system for young people to designing an education system with young people, So that's where I'm right now. I think the current obsession is, how do we get to a place where change making becomes normal in Singapore? Like every young person, they see a problem, they do something about it, rather than wait for someone else to solve their problem. So that's where I'm currently obsessed around.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's great to hear. I think the audience can send in questions. Yeah, they'll be sending in soon. Meanwhile, maybe do you guys have questions from each other? For each other, sorry.
Or maybe you want to catch your breath, because I feel like you guys have been doing a lot of talking in the past hour. But thank you for all you've shared. It is very helpful, and I feel like everyone in the audience has learned a lot. Mm-hmm.
Actually, I mean, just to throw it back to all of you, especially your SMU SAIC team, like what, and to think about Rajesh's question, right, about like how to inspire young people to make change, like what has been each of your kind of whys, right, or like what sparked you, what inspired you, what brought you to even start SMU SAIC?
I think, Dingan, are you here? You can take this question. It was Dingan and Raiden. You can just start talking.
Hello, again, I'm back. I think that's a very good question. So actually in SMU, for SIC, it's the first year that we have such a student club that focuses on social entrepreneurship. So I think that really started off just from what Calista mentioned, it's all about education. So our president and I, Raiden and I, went for a social entrepreneurship class under one of our professors, and we felt that there was so much more to learn and so much more that we can do for the student community in SMU. And I think that's, as someone that has been working with kids, be it from juvenile homes or students with disabilities, I felt that it was also aligned with how I wanted to create impact for these youth communities as well. And so with the current president, Raiden, and I, through some discussions with SIC HQ, we thought that it was going to be useful to help introduce this whole landscape to SMU, especially when SMU is more of like a business school. I'll just leave it as that. It was a very new and fresh perspective. So working with Land Center of Social Innovation, that is where we are today. And we are really trying to build the brand for social impact and social entrepreneurship within the school. And hopefully it all turns out well for the future upcoming batches as well. Yeah. I hope that addresses. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, at least that's for me. Yeah.
Maybe if I can add on to that, I think to echo Tingan's thoughts as well as what I just said, right? We really wanted to change how conversations were centered around, especially at SMU, especially because we are very business focused school. So we wanted to change the conversations from like what corporate job are we getting to what kind of change are we able to make in this society. So I think this journey was really just to create a social platform, as well as a platform for budding social entrepreneurs to kind of rise up, and as well as to fulfill their potential and address a very specific need in this society. I think, especially as youth, we often take things for granted. So it's really just about exposing them and trying to improve the educational aspect, as what you guys said. Education starts from young. So I believe that we are still considered quite young. So we still have the potential to rise up, as well as to address the issues that societies are facing nowadays. So yeah, I think we've come really far, and I hope that everyone is learning as well as going together with us.
That's great. Thanks for sharing.
I think, thank you, Raiden, for your sharing. It's creating those spaces for conversations really help. I'll just give you a simple example. A year back, we ran a social entrepreneurship boot camp for 70 teenagers. They were all 15-year-olds from the Singapore school system. And it's a 2-day program to find an issue that they were passionate about and what kind of solutions would they think of. So we had a split. 50% of the students wanted to do something, 50% didn't care. Okay. So the ones who wanted to do something, it was easy to work with them because you just had to give them a few guiding questions and then they'll think about it. The ones who didn't care, we tried a few things, but we just couldn't get an uplift. Then we told them that your parents are most likely won't be able to tell you how you can be successful. The only way you're going to be successful is if you realize your power to create change. You know, in 10 minutes, that group flipped. That group thought of a social issue, figured out a solution, and was thinking of what are the next steps. So I think sometimes when we create these spaces in conversation, it's about changing that conversation or changing the framing question. The moment you change the framing question, there's a high chance people will be more interested rather than so it's not just about, okay, I want to do social impact because it feels good, or it's about giving back to society. Giving back to society is your moral responsibility. It's not just because you join a nonprofit. So how do you change the conversation so that people also contribute to the space?
Another thing I've been thinking a lot about is building community. So I hope that that's something that's one of the pillars that SMU SIC has, because I think I've just seen that firsthand, the power of bringing together people who are of the same passion, the same dedication, the same commitment, the same burning desire to see change. I think it does so much. I'm part of, outside of Eden, I'm part of this organization called Spark Indonesia, And it's a social impact-led movement. It's a youth-led movement where we're seeing us, like, we'll hold an event, and afterwards, like, this group of young, passionate Indonesians will come in the chat and just share about all the initiatives that they're working on. I think it's that creating that sense of camaraderie, of knowing that you're not the only one, fighting against, like, wherever you are working on or whatever issue you're working on. But they have others to rally with you, that there's other people doing similar work, and that together all of your work is really changing the sector. I think sometimes in social entrepreneurship especially, it feels like you're so small. You're like one little drop trying to move like this tiny aspect. But I think building that community is really just an amazing thing to do, amazing thing that drives more work. Yeah, I just hope that that's something that that comes out of this kind of space that you guys create.
Okay, so thank you for everything you've shared tonight. I think that we've come to the end of our webinar. So, sorry. So tonight, I guess we've learned what an SE is. We've defined it. We've heard the various definitions, and we've heard what it means to you. But I think aside from definitions, we've also really highlighted the importance of having strong communities and having that openness to change your perspectives and see the world around you, not just for what you want it to be, but what it can be. Also for maybe, especially for the people who come from different backgrounds as you. So with that, we'd like to thank you again, CatalySE and Rajesh, for coming down to talk with us tonight. And it was really great to hear from your perspectives. And we'd like to thank the audience for coming down to listen on a Monday night. I'm sure you guys had as many takeaways as we did. So we'd just like to take a quick group photo just now. So if people could on their cameras, that would be great. And Darshan is going to take a quick photo.
Lisa, are you taking the photo now?
Okay, I can take the photo. Hold on, let me switch this with you.
Can you do a countdown?
1, 2, 3. Can someone else help me take the photo also? Can you do another one? Okay. 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, great. Thank you. So one last thing before we go, we actually have a surprise for everyone in the audience. So we'd like to thank Sustainable for sponsoring tonight. So they've actually given us a code for everyone in the audience to, hold on, sorry. Yeah, they've actually given everyone in the audience a code. So if you use the code SICX Sustainable, you could get 1-for-1 on their tote bags and metal straws on their website. So just check out the code. It's limited to the first 100 redemptions. And then don't forget to follow SIC, SMU, and Sustainable on Instagram for a chance to win one of the tote bags. And then next slide. So again, thank you for coming down. And if you have any comments for us, please feel free to fill out the feedback form, which we'll be sending in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you, CatalySE.
Thanks for the opportunity. Great to meet you.
Yeah.
And everyone here.
Thank you for coming down.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you all for coming down.
Thanks, Christy and Alan, as well.
Thank you.